And welcome back for another deep dive. Have you ever actually stopped to think about, like really think about, whether some of the foods you eat every day could, kind of be increasing your chances of getting cancer?
It's a pretty, I guess, unsettling thought, right?
Yeah, totally.
But, when you actually start digging into the research from some pretty reputable places, like, for instance, the American Cancer Society, there's this, pretty clear connection that emerges between certain dietary patterns and creating an environment within your body where cancer can actually thrive. It's pretty wild.
It is, and that's exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive today, to really unpack these connections and look at what we can do about it. We've got a lot of fascinating material to go through.
We do. We've been taking a really close look at all the stuff you shared, and honestly, it's super important information. Like,
Right.
really, everyone should know this stuff. So what we're going to try to do today is really pull out the most critical knowledge about these potential food-related risks. And just as importantly, give you some really clear and straightforward steps, things you can actually do. So think of this as your guide to understanding a really, really vital part of this whole health puzzle. What we eat matters.
It really does. And we're going to make sure that we get to the bottom of it. And as always, we don't want to get too bogged down in all the complicated science.
Right.
We're going to try and keep it clear and actionable for everybody. So we're going to be focusing on 4 specific food categories that we just kept seeing over and over again in all of your research. Processed meats, refined sugar, refined vegetable oils, and those ultra-processed foods. I swear, they're everywhere these days.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they take over the entire grocery store.
Hmm.
But we'll delve into all of that.
Yes, we are going to break it all down.
We're going to explore the science behind why these things are raising red flags for cancer risk. And then, maybe even more importantly, we're going to look at some surprisingly easy and tasty alternatives that you might not have thought of.
Right.
And we really want to stress right up front that this isn't about trying to scare anyone.
Yeah.
No one wants to feel like they're walking on eggshells with every single food choice they make.
Totally.
This is about giving you, the listeners, access to really solid research so you can make those choices for yourself, feel empowered.
Exactly. All right, let's jump right in. So the first category, this is something I think a lot of us might have in our fridge right now, processed meats.
Okay, so here's something that might surprise you. Back in 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, that's the IARC, actually classified processed meat as a Group 1 carcinogen.
Whoa.
I know, right?
That's huge.
It's huge. Think about it. The same global health body that tells us all to avoid smoking is also warning us about eating bacon and hot dogs regularly.
Wow. That is something to think about.
Should give us all pause, right?
It really should. So what exactly are we talking about when we say processed meats? Is it literally every single one? Like even that occasional hot dog at, a baseball game?
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
It includes all of those things: bacon, sausages, salami, pepperoni, and all those super convenient deli slices we often grab for sandwiches. They're all in that category.
Gotcha. And those are pretty common in people's diets.
They are super common. In fact, one of the sources you sent actually mentioned that the average American eats something like 18 pounds of bacon every year.
18 pounds? That's wild.
It is. So if we kind of connect that with the bigger picture, that level of consumption, along with how those meats are actually treated to preserve them, to keep them shelf stable and all that, and then how we tend to cook them.
Yeah.
All of that together kind of creates a few different potential problems.
Okay, let's dive into those problems. What are they?
So problem number 1, the nitrates and nitrites that they use to, as preservatives to keep bacteria from growing.
Right.
Those can actually transform into cancer-causing compounds called nitrosamines.
Inside your body.
Inside your body, exactly. And this happens particularly when they hit high heat in the pan. Or when they're in that acidic environment in your stomach.
Gotcha.
And then these nitrosamines, they can actually directly damage our DNA.
Okay, so that's one problem. So is it just those preservatives that are doing the damage? Or is there more to it?
Well, it turns out that frying, let's say, bacon until it's nice and crispy creates another set of not-so-friendly compounds. These are things called heterocyclic amines, HCAs for short.
Okay.
And then polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which we'll call PAHs.
Okay.
So think of these as like tiny toxic byproducts of high heat cooking.
Okay.
And guess what they do?
They mess with your DNA.
They can, yes.
Okay, so it's kind of a double whammy situation.
Kind of a 1-2 punch.
All right, well, that's not good news. So, how much of these meats do we have to eat before it becomes a real concern? Like, are we talking a little bit every day, or is it more of an occasional thing?
Well, the research is pretty clear that there's something called a dose-response relationship. So for every 50 grams of processed meat that you eat daily, that's about 2 slices of bacon or a single hot dog.
Okay, 2 slices, 1 hot dog.
Your risk of colorectal cancer goes up by about 18%.
Hey, 10%, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a significant increase.
Mm.
And if you think about it, colorectal cancer is the 3rd most commonly diagnosed cancer in the U.S.
Wow.
So that number is definitely something to pay attention to.
It is. Now, I've seen packages that say nitrate-free or uncured.
Oh,
They sound like a healthier option.
yeah.
But are they really, I mean, in terms of cancer risk, are they actually any different?
That's a great question. And it's something a lot of people are wondering about. So these uncured products often use things like celery powder or cherry powder, things that sound more natural
Right.
as preservatives. But here's the thing. These powders are still concentrated sources of nitrates. And remember, those are the things that our bodies can convert into those nitrosamines, the cancer-causing compounds we talked about.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately, that potential cancer risk doesn't really disappear just because it's labeled nitrate-free or uncured.
So it's kind of a, I don't want to say marketing ploy, but it's,
Yeah, you got to be careful with those labels.
yeah, be careful with those labels, right? Because it's not just the DNA damage from these compounds.
Right.
The research also mentioned something about chronic inflammation. Like, how does that play into all of this?
Yeah, great question. So these compounds that we find in processed meats, they can trigger this ongoing low-grade inflammation in your digestive system, kind of like constantly irritating the lining of your gut.
Okay.
And that can create a more, shall we say, welcoming environment for cancer cells to, grab hold and start growing.
Not good. Not good at all. Okay, so we talked about the bad news. Is there any good news here? Like, are there any alternatives to processed meats that we can reach for that actually taste good?
Well, the good news is that plant-based food has become so innovative these days.
It really has.
It's amazing. So, for example, if you're really craving that bacon flavor, too, you can try tempeh bacon.
Tempeh bacon.
And it's especially good when you marinate it with things like liquid smoke, for that smoky taste. A little maple syrup for some sweetness, some tamari for savory depth.
Oh, that sounds really good, actually.
Yeah, it can be surprisingly satisfying. And if you're more of a hot dog or a sausage person, well, there are some great options now that are made from pea protein or seitan.
Okay.
And they even, mimic that really juicy texture that we kind of expect from, traditional hot dogs.
So what about for, like, quick deli sandwiches? Are there any good substitutes for those? Oh, definitely. So you can try mushroom-based deli meats. And for those, they often use heartier mushrooms like king oyster or shiitake, and they slice them and marinate them so you get a similar texture to traditional deli slices.
Oh, interesting.
And then for things like pulled pork or shredded chicken, young jackfruit is a really cool option. It's got a naturally mild flavor and a really nice stringy texture that absorbs seasonings beautifully.
Okay, all those sound amazing, actually. I'm definitely going to have to try some of those.
Yeah, you should.
So is the message here that we need to, totally eliminate processed meats from our diets entirely?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Even making gradual reductions in how often you eat them can make a real difference. So think about, making them more of an occasional treat instead of a daily staple. And if you do choose to have them, maybe just pair them with lots of antioxidant-rich vegetables to help counteract some of that oxidative stress. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so moving on to our next category. We've got refined sugar. Now, the research materials started off with this really vivid image of medical technicians using this radioactively labeled glucose to actually make tumors light up on those PyT stands.
Oh, yeah?
And it was a really, really powerful visual, because it really drove home just how much cancer cells seem to absolutely crave sugar.
It is a pretty powerful image, right? And it really emphasizes that cancer cells have a huge appetite for glucose.
They do.
And what's also pretty alarming is just how much added sugar is in the standard American diet these days.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the numbers are pretty crazy.
The average intake is somewhere around 17 teaspoons per day.
Wow.
Which is way, way beyond what any health organization recommends.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because sugar's not just in the obvious things like, everyone knows cookies and soda are loaded with sugar.
Yeah, but it's everywhere.
But it's in things like yogurt, granola bars, even pasta sauce,
Oh, yeah.
salad dressings,
Salad dressing.
even bread.
Absolutely.
And I think the research mentioned that there are over 60 different names for sugar on those ingredient lists. I mean, are they trying to hide it from us?
It can be really hard, honestly,
Yeah, no.
for consumers to actually keep track of their sugar intake. It's like a full-time job
Seriously.
with so many different names and these hidden sources of sugar. It's like a minefield out there.
It is. But going back to like how cancer cells actually use sugar, the research mentioned something called the Warburg effect. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So the Warburg effect basically shows that cancer cells have this really weird preference for how they use sugar.
Okay.
So it's almost like they have this faulty engine. It burns fuel inefficiently, but really, really quickly, even when there's plenty of oxygen around.
Wow.
And this allows them to grow and multiply really rapidly. It's like their superpower.
So they're basically hoarding all the sugar to fuel their rapid growth.
They are. That's
Yeah.
exactly it.
That's crazy. And I think one of the sources actually said that they consume glucose at a rate 10 to 12 times higher than healthy cells.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
That is mind-blowing.
It is. And going back to those PDT scans we talked about, they actually take advantage of this sugar addiction, this kind of metabolic quirk in cancer cells
Right.
to actually locate tumors in the body. So they inject this radioactive glucose, and the cancer cells gobble it up way faster than any of the healthy cells, making them super visible on the scan.
So it's not just about the sugar, like feeding the cancer cells directly, right?
Oh, you're right.
Having high levels of sugar in your blood and then the resulting insulin spikes seems to play a much broader role in cancer development as well.
Absolutely. It's all connected.
Yeah.
So when we eat a lot of sugar consistently, it can lead to chronically elevated insulin levels.
Okay.
Now, we all know insulin is important for controlling blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
But insulin can also act as a growth factor in the body. And that means it can potentially speed up the formation of tumors. Plus, all that excess sugar triggers inflammation. And we already talked about how dangerous chronic inflammation can be, right?
Nope, that's the theme of the day, apparently.
It sets up this perfect environment where cancer cells can flourish.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's the link between sugar intake, weight gain, and cancer. I mean, the American Cancer Society has actually said that being overweight or obese is linked to at least 13 different types of cancer.
Yeah, that's a lot of cancer. And your sources were right to point out that those sugary drinks and, the typical Western-style diet that's packed with added sugars, they're huge contributors to excess body fat.
Right.
So yeah, the dangers of refined sugar are pretty multi-pronged.
Yeah.
It feeds cancer cells, promotes inflammation, and contributes to obesity.
So it's a triple threat, basically.
Pretty much.
Okay, well, that is, not the best news. But is there a silver lining here? Like, I know the sources said that making changes to your diet, like cutting back on sugar, can have positive effects on your body relatively quickly.
Yeah, that's the good news. So studies have shown that when people cut down on their sugar intake, they see noticeable improvements in inflammation and their body's insulin resistance pretty quickly.
Really?
It's pretty amazing, actually. It
Yeah.
effectively starts to starve those cancer cells, making your internal environment way less hospitable.
And I think the American Cancer Society specifically said that we should try to limit or eliminate those super sugary drinks and processed foods. So, practically speaking, what can people do to cut back on sugar in their daily lives?
Well, I think the most important thing is to become a really savvy label reader.
Right.
You got to start paying attention to the ingredient list and all those different, hidden names for sugar. And then try to, center your diet around whole, unprocessed foods and really be wary of products that have sugar listed near the top of those ingredients. It's a good sign it's packed with the sweet stuff.
Yeah.
Also, don't be fooled by those low-fat labels.
Right.
Because a lot of times they just load those products up with sugar to compensate for the flavor. And, as the source mentioned, try to retrain your taste buds. It's totally possible.
Okay.
Learn to appreciate the natural sweetness in fruits.
That's a great tip.
And you get the bonus of fiber and other beneficial compounds when you eat fruit. So it's a win-win.
Awesome. Okay, so that's refined sugar. Let's move on to something that's maybe a little less obvious. Refined vegetable oils.
Yeah.
These are often marketed as heart healthy.
Right, they are.
But the sources we looked at seem to say that there might be more to the story when it comes to cancer risk.
Yeah, there's definitely more to this story.
Okay.
So the interesting thing here is how these oils things like soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, sunflower oil.
Yeah, yep.
They've become so common in the food we eat.
They really are everywhere.
It's not just that bottle on your shelf.
Yeah. No.
It's in every single packaged food you can imagine. It's pretty crazy. And I think the main problem here is how they're actually processed.
Okay.
So unlike, more traditional fats, these oils go through this huge industrial process that involves chemical solvents
Chemical solvage.
and high heat, which changes their molecular structure.
Okay.
And then on top of that, they often bleach and deodorize them. So it's, a far cry from just pressing an olive or churning butter.
So it sounds like a lot of intense processing is happening.
Oh, tons of processing.
Okay. And this leads to an imbalance in the types of fats we're eating.
Right, exactly.
Especially the ratio of, omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids.
That's a really key point.
Okay, break that down for us. What does that actually mean?
So these oils are super high in omega-6 fatty acids.
Mm-hmm.
And we need both omega-6s and omega-3s, right? They're both essential. But we need them in a specific balance.
Okay.
And our modern diet, with all of these refined oils, it just floods our bodies with omega-6s, and that throws the balance way off. And what does that lead to? You guessed it. Inflammation.
Okay. So more inflammation.
More inflammation.
Not a good thing.
Not a good thing.
And it sounds like things actually get even worse when you heat these oils up to cook.
Oh, absolutely they do. When these oils are exposed to high heat, they oxidize really quickly.
Okay.
And that generates all of these unstable molecules called free radicals. And those can attack our DNA and potentially lead to those mutations that can start cancer development.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like a chain reaction.
Yeah, like a domino effect.
Okay, so I'm already feeling pretty bad about these oils, but there's more, right? The source mentioned trans fats.
Yes, trans fats. So this is really important. Even in products that say zero trans fats, because of labeling loopholes, they can still have up to half a gram per serving.
So it's not really zero.
Not really zero. And even those small amounts can disrupt the way our cells communicate and interfere with our natural cancer-suppressing mechanisms.
Oh, wow. That is sneaky. Okay, so it seems like research is connecting all this to an increased risk of certain cancers, right?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like the increased inflammation from these oils might be linked to higher rates of breast cancer, prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, and even the American Cancer Society recommends limiting processed foods that contain these oils.
They do. And it's interesting, right? Because these oils were initially marketed as like these healthy alternatives to traditional fats like butter.
I know, right? Such a plot twist.
So what can we use instead?
Well, luckily, there are some really great and much more stable alternatives.
Okay.
So high-quality extra virgin olive oil is a fantastic option.
Okay.
It's full of beneficial compounds called polyphenols, which have anti-cancer properties.
Okay, so extra virgin olive oil's good. What else?
Avocado oil is another great one.
Okay.
It's really stable at higher cooking temperatures, and it gives you those good monounsaturated fats.
Yeah.
And even coconut oil.
Coconut oil. Okay.
It doesn't go through the same damaging oxidation when it's heated.
Oh, that's good to know. So are the benefits of switching to these other oils like noticeable?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Studies have shown that when people replace refined vegetable oils with these healthier options, they can see like a really significant reduction in oxidative stress in their bodies.
Yeah.
Like sometimes by as much as 30% in just a few weeks.
Wow. Okay. So that's pretty compelling.
It is.
So I guess the takeaways here would be to, really check those ingredient lists for soybean oil, corn oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, and try to choose products that don't have those in them. And then when we're cooking, using olive oil for lower temperatures, avocado oil for medium-high heat, and maybe even coconut oil or butter for really high heat.
Yeah, that's a great summary. And like we talked about earlier, filling half of your plate with vegetables and fruits will naturally help you reduce your reliance on those processed foods that are full of these problematic oils.
Right. Great tips. Okay, so let's move on to our final category, which is ultra-processed foods. Now, the source brought up something called the NOVA classification system. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so the NOVA system was developed by researchers in Brazil, and it's this really helpful and increasingly important way to categorize food. And they do it based on not just what's in it, but on how much processing it's gone through.
Okay.
So they divide all foods into 4 groups. And it's that 4th group, the ultra-processed foods, that are causing concern when it comes to cancer risk.
Okay, so what exactly is an ultra-processed food? Like, is it just anything that's in a package?
No, it's a little more specific than that.
Okay.
So ultra-processed foods, or UPFs for short.
Okay, UPF.
So they're like industrial formulations, basically.
Okay.
They're made from these extracted food substances, starches, sugars, fats, and then combined with a whole bunch of additives.
Oh, okay.
So think artificial flavors, colors, emulsifiers, preservatives, and they have very little, if any, whole recognizable food ingredients.
Okay, so give us some examples.
Think packaged snacks, sugary drinks, ready-to-eat meals, mass-produced baked goods, a lot of the breakfast cereal.
Okay, yeah, I get it. So like stuff you wouldn't make at home.
Exactly. And if you look at the ingredient list, you'll often see high fructose corn syrup, modified oils, hydrogenated fats, like a bunch of stuff you wouldn't find in your pantry.
Right, yeah. And the research linking these UPFs to cancer is pretty concerning, right?
It is. There was a huge study in the British Medical Journal that found that for every 10% increase in UPFs in someone's diet, their overall cancer risk went up by 12%.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Yeah, it is. So it's a link that's got researchers worried.
And it sounds like there are lots of ways these UPFs might be contributing to cancer.
Right, there are multiple mechanisms at play.
Okay.
So many of these foods actually contain things like acrylamide, which forms during high heat processing, like frying and baking, and advanced glycation end products, AGEs, which form during high heat cooking or storage.
Okay.
Both of these have the potential to cause cancer. And then a lot of them contain those emulsifiers and artificial additives we talked about earlier that can disrupt normal cell processes and contribute to chronic inflammation.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. And I remember the sources also talking about the impact on gut bacteria.
Yes. So UPFs are usually very low in fiber, which is what those beneficial bacteria in our gut need to thrive. And they can contain additives that actually kill off both bad and good bacteria, which disrupts the balance in our gut and leads to, you guessed it, more inflammation.
Always the inflammation.
Always. There was even a study that linked UPF to a higher risk of breast cancer.
And then there's the whole issue of how these foods are like engineered to be super appealing and almost addictive. Like you
Yeah.
just can't stop eating them.
I know.
And that obviously could lead to weight gain and obesity, which we know are risk factors for cancer.
They're designed to be what we call hyperpalatable,
Okay.
which is like the perfect storm of high sugar, salt, and fat. Plus, they often have artificial flavors and textures that make you just want to keep eating. And then they market them as convenient, which, it's true, they're convenient, but they're not doing our health any favors.
So what can people actually do to reduce their exposure to these UPFs? Like, I feel like they're unavoidable sometimes.
Well, the source had a few tips. One is the peripheral shopping approach, where you stick to the outer aisles of the grocery store, where they usually have the fresh produce, the meats, the dairy, and the less processed bread.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip.
And then if you do go into the center aisles, try using the 5-ingredient rule.
Yeah.
If a product has more than 5 ingredients, especially if you can't pronounce them or they sound like chemicals, it's probably a UPF.
Right, yeah, good advice.
And just try to cook simple meals at home. It can be just as quick as heating up something processed, but it's so much better for you.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of potentially scary stuff today,
We have.
but let's switch gears and talk about the positive side. What happens in our bodies when we start to get rid of these foods we've been talking about?
Well, the good news is that our bodies are incredible at healing.
Okay, good.
When you remove those harmful compounds, your natural defenses can start working the way they're supposed to. One process that gets a boost is called autophagy.
Autophagy, okay.
It's basically your body's way of cleaning out damaged cells that could turn into cancer.
So by cutting out those foods, we're helping that process work better.
Exactly. It's like spring cleaning for your cells.
Nice. So is it just autophagy or is there more going on?
Well, your immune system also gets a boost.
Okay.
So natural killer cells, which are like your body's first line of defense against cancer, become more active and effective when they're not dealing with constant inflammation.
Right.
So they can focus on finding and eliminating those early abnormal cells.
Okay. So are there actual measurable improvements that people might notice?
Oh yeah, definitely. Studies have shown that when people make these kinds of dietary changes, they can see big decreases in markers of inflammation, like C-reactive protein, sometimes by like 30% or more within a month. You might also see your fasting insulin levels go back to normal, which is a good thing.
Okay, so real changes happening inside the body. That's really encouraging.
It is, and it's not just about removing things from your diet.
Right.
It's also about what you add in.
Okay, so what should we be adding in?
Well, the research highlighted the Mediterranean diet as a really good cancer protective way of eating.
Okay, yeah, I've heard good things about the Mediterranean diet. So what exactly does it involve?
So it's a diet that's rich in plant-based foods, whole grains, healthy fats, and lean protein.
Hmm.
And it's been linked to lower rates of cancer in tons of studies.
That's awesome.
And the American Cancer Society suggests filling half of your plate with lots of different colorful vegetables and fruits,
Okay.
because those are packed with cancer-fighting compounds and antioxidants. And then choosing lean protein sources like poultry, fish, beans, tofu, instead of those processed meats.
Right. And we talked about cooking with whole foods.
Yes, cooking with whole foods is key.
And I remember reading about some pretty impressive reductions in cancer risk associated with all of these changes.
Yeah, studies have shown that combining a healthy diet with the reduction of those harmful foods we talked about could reduce cancer risk by up to 40%.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That's huge.
And the best part, these changes start happening pretty quickly.
Okay, so big takeaway, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
Focus on a healthy eating pattern, just like experts at the American Cancer Society and other major health organizations recommend.
Mm.
That means really prioritizing those nutrient-rich foods, veggies, fruits, whole grains,
Mhm.
and minimizing those red and processed meats, all the processed food in general, and sugary drinks.
And the sources actually quoted someone, I think their name was Wolford, who said that this will go a long way towards reducing your overall risk. It really emphasizes that these choices we make every day about what we eat have a really powerful impact on our health in the long run.
Absolutely. Even small, consistent changes can make a huge difference. By making choices that create an internal environment that's less favorable to cancer development, you're making a big investment in your well-being.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
Bye, everyone.